Thank you. I'm delighted to be with you and excited to share what I've been learning about the power of questions the last few years. So, we all know that the world is complex and it's full of change. And I will propose that the power of asking the right questions is the anchor in the storm. That's my proposition. Let's see if you believe it. Here we go. 40 years ago, I started a love affair with photography. And since then, I wander around the world with a single question: what's interesting? I'm always watching for what's interesting. I was in northern Paris in the antiques market area, and I noticed this plastic car up on a wall. I thought, that's interesting, and started to take some photos of it. But if I had been living in 1886, I would never have been able to do that, even if I had the question, because I would not have been a professional photographer. And in 1886, you had cameras that were about a ½ meter by a ½ meter wide. You had to be a professional to use them. And if you and I went to have our pictures taken, we would have gone to a shop where they would have had this big camera. It would have taken a long time. It would have been expensive. And finally, we would have received our picture back, but you and I would not have been taking those pictures. George Eastman lived at this point in time, 1886. He worked in the industry, in the technology side, and he actually bought that camera equipment when he was a young father. And he bought it to go on vacation with his family. Can you imagine that? This stuff, 1886, taking that on vacation. And 3 days before they were supposed to leave, the family actually got sick and they couldn't go. So he's sitting there reflecting to himself, a family like me, how could we do this differently? I don't want to be carrying all this equipment around. He then used his design thinking and all his questions in the world to figure out a better way to make a camera. Fast forward 4 years to 1900, it's the Brownie box camera. It cost $1 US. It transformed a complex, expensive process for very few people into a simple, inexpensive process for not only millions, but today billions of people who use cameras to take pictures. You put a roll of film inside, you've got this invention, it's a cardboard box. That's a disruptive innovation. These are what they do. Complex, expensive process for few to an inexpensive, simple process for many people. Fast forward, 1947, my mother, after World War II, is traveling through Europe. She's in Paris on the stairs of the St. Madeleine Church. She has her picture taken with a Kodak camera. But it's a Kodak number 3. It's an innovation that is sustaining. It keeps the product line going. Now we fast forward, 1963. Fujifilm enters the US, Kodak's home market. They come in with film that is cheaper than Kodak's. What does Kodak have to do? They have to get way more efficient. And they focus on efficiency to be able to compete with Fujifilm in their own market. Now, the challenge becomes, as a company or as an individual, the moment we focus and completely put our energy on efficiency as an innovation, we are setting ourselves up to be disrupted. That's what happened to Kodak. So fast forward, 1975. In Kodak Labs, they developed the first electronic camera. But for a lot of reasons, do nothing with it. Fast forward, 2006, I join INSEAD. I moved to Paris. I go to the same steps where my mother had her picture taken. It actually was taken with the Kodak electronic camera. Fast forward now, 2012, my daughter, the granddaughter of my mother, is now working in Paris. She has her picture taken on the same stairs. What kind of camera? An iPhone. The disruptor in 1900 becomes the disrupted in 2012. And I would suggest that the story of Kodak is the story of life. It's the story of individual leaders. It's the story of strategic teams. It's the story of any company or country. Either we are waking up and disrupting the world, or we are being disrupted. There is no middle ground. And so what I'm going to suggest is, how can we be the disruptors? And what we did working with Clayton Christensen to develop this book called The Innovator's DNA is we went out into the world and said, okay, who are the greatest disruptors out there? The people who have changed the world with the questions they asked and the answers they got. We interviewed 100 plus of these people. Jeff Bezos at Amazon, Nicholas Zenstrom at Skype, Pierre Omidyar from eBay, Peter Thiel from PayPal, and on and on. Fadi Gandour down in the Middle East, he founded this company called Aramix. Anyway, the issue is, how did they get their initial ideas that led to these companies that changed their industry? Now pretend that you shadowed them for a day or a week or a month even. You would see them doing things that non-disruptors don't do. And here's what they do. Number one, they think differently. Steve Jobs, you know the story. He worked in two industries, the computer industry and then running Pixar in the entertainment industry. We know from our data that working in two industries doubles the probability that someone will get a disruptive idea that actually creates value. How many of you have worked in two or more industries? You've just upped your chances for being a disruptor. It's the same story for living or working in two different countries. It's getting different viewpoints that gives us the capacity to see the world differently. Now, they think differently because they act differently. Literally, they act differently. And one of the things they do is they ask a lot of questions. And they're provocative questions. They're ones that cause people to be uncomfortable. They question everything. So you've got Albert Einstein who said this years ago. You've got Jack Dorsey who lives by it, founder of Twitter and other companies. But that's the notion, question everything. And this is the challenge. That guy is jumping into a swimming pool, right? The water's deep. What's the worst of all worlds for him? The worst of all worlds is that he doesn't know how to swim, and he doesn't know it, right? Because if he knew he didn't know how to swim, he would not be jumping off the diving board. This is the disruptive challenge. It's figuring out what questions we don't know, and start asking them. And if we don't figure it out, I promise you someone else will find those questions, and we'll be going off the diving board into the other side. This guy's name is Stuart Brand. Here's his strategy for uncovering what he doesn't know. He founded a book called The Whole Earth Catalog. Lasted for years. The last issue, the last page was Stay Hungry, Stay Foolish. Steve Jobs used that phrase in his Stanford commencement address about his life and his life story, Stay Hungry, Stay Foolish. I talked with Stuart Brand about how do you find the right questions, Stuart? Single line answer. Every day I wake up wondering how many things I am dead wrong about. Does anyone do that in this room? Hasso raised his hand. You're one of those Stuart Brands in the world, which is, it's not that we're trying to destroy everything. It's just that every day we're wondering, what am I dead wrong about with this employee I'm interacting with, or with the service we're delivering to somebody? What am I not quite seeing here? So how these people go out with the right questions is they're constantly trying to figure out what's working, what's not, and why. And so this guy's name's A.G. Lafley. He was the CEO of Procter & Gamble and chairman 2001, 2009, and recently returned. I interviewed A.G. before he ever became the CEO. He asked me more questions than I asked him in the research project. And he does this when he wanders the world. And he's got a dominant question that drives his leadership at Procter & Gamble. He goes into a new country. He lands, leaves the airport. Where's the first place he goes? Might check into a hotel. Where's the first place he goes afterwards? He goes to supermarkets. It's a consumer products company. And when he's in that store, what questions is he asking? Because the questions he asks drives the data he sees. If he's interested in what products are placed, that's what he'll see. What other products are there? What's the price point? All those kinds of questions. His question is actually, are consumers delighted when they buy our products? Is there any sparkle in their eyes, any excitement when they buy our products? Now, has anyone ever seen someone excited buying laundry detergent? But that's what he's looking for, any excitement here. After he visits a few stores, then he goes into homes. And what question is driving his observations, his conversations in those homes? Are consumers delighted when they use our products? And after he does 6 or 7 homes, then he goes to the country or regional headquarters and has a very intriguing conversation with real-time personal data about delight or non-delight of those consumers in that country. It's a very interesting process. I also happen to be an advisory board member at a privately held company in Canada. It's a pharmaceutical company called Pharmascience. I'll never forget the first board meeting, where it's a traditional board meeting. The business units brought their strategic plans to the board. They delivered their ideas. We had some conversation, but it was almost staged. And we decided we're going to change this. And so we said, next board meeting, here's the process. Each business unit leader, your job is to decide what are the 1 or 2 questions you are most wrestling with running your business. The tough stuff you don't have the answers to. And guess what? We want you to tell us those questions as board members before we even get to that meeting. So we can think about them, and then we can have a great conversation about the things you're wrestling with. It changed the nature of the meeting because we were striving to understand what's working, what's not, and why. And that then leads us to, okay, wow, what's surprising? What do we see now that we never saw before? And then that goes to, if we don't look for surprises by going out there and asking these questions, I promise you surprises will look for us. And let me show you this quick video clip to illustrate the reason we're looking for surprises every day. We get the sound going? That hurt. That hurt. The issue is again, it's we wake up in the morning, what are we dead wrong about like this guy was? What's the question I'm supposed to be asking to see things differently? What's the surprise that I'm noticing? Peter Drucker made a great quote about finding the right questions. It's the important and difficult job is never to find the right answers. It's to find the right question. It's like a key that unlocks a problem. And he also said, if we don't have the right questions, it's the most dangerous of all situations. And it really is. So, how do I, in your situation, generate better questions? Ones that help me work my way through mountains of data, for example. The data's there now. It's the questions that matter. What are we asking? And so, how many of you have a problem for which you do not have a solution right at the moment? Could you please raise your hand? A professional problem. We all have personal problems. I know that. But professionally, everybody in here has got a problem. Am I right? You don't have an answer to it? So here's my suggestion. Construct a better question, because the reason the problem exists, it's hooked like a Siamese twin to the questions we're already asking. And if we don't change our questions, we will not get a new solution. So here's one way of doing it. This guy's name is Ahmed Bozer. He is now the president of Coca-Cola International, which is everything for Coca-Cola outside of the United States. I've been working with Ahmed for the past several years about strategic issues they're wrestling with. And here's what we do in those workshops. We figure out, okay, what's one problem, like you just raised your hand to, you don't have a solution to? Then we say, brainstorm nothing but questions. Literally, nothing but questions. Don't answer the questions, which is management's role and sort of knee-jerk automatic reaction. Question gets asked, what does management do? They answer it. Don't. Don't answer it, and don't explain why you're asking the question, just ask the questions. Grab a flip chart, grab a whiteboard, try to generate 50, 75 questions. Get teams of 5 or 6 people, generate nothing but questions, because you all are asking questions. You're doing it. But what this methodology does is it gets the questions out. It sometimes generates new ones, helps us see the pattern, and start to find a different, better question. Anybody done this before? We're going to do it for 2 minutes, really fast. And here's the question. Here's the problem. A lot of people, maybe some in this room, I just don't have the time in my day to be out there discovering and delivering disruptive ideas. I just don't have the time. That's a problem for a lot of people from top to the bottom of organizations. Lights up, please, in the room. I'm going to give you 90 to 120 seconds. You are going to question storm right now as a group of 3 or 4 people just sitting there together. Generate as many questions as you possibly can about this problem. Clear what to do? Nothing but questions, go. Give it a run. Okay. I know it's difficult to imagine, but if you were really doing this on a problem you cared about, I would suggest spending 15 or 20 minutes literally generating nothing but questions. Now, I saw some of you weren't doing it. I get it. You can choose to not do it. Some of you were doing it. Some were engaged doing it. For those who were engaged and actively just were generating questions, did you start to see this problem a little bit differently by just asking questions for a few minutes? Raise your hands if you just started to see it. I see at least half the hands in this room up. And the reason why is when we confront a problem, if we don't step back and ask nothing but questions, all of our history, all of our stories, all of our experience will step front, and we already have the answers. And this forces us to reflect and rethink the questions we've got. Now, here's why I think this is an important question to ask. Does your company have a question-centric culture? I was talking with the CEO of Lonely Planet, the travel guide book. You know what I'm talking about, that travel guides? I met him in Singapore last year, and he said, Hal, until I became the CEO, I was a question-centric leader. I mean, an answer-centric leader. And when I became the CEO, I had to become a question-centric leader, and it was traumatic. Because the systems I grew up in, the development of me as a leader was all answer-centric. How I got promoted was having the right answers. But when I get to the senior level of a company, you know it, am I right? That complexity and that mess out there is where you've got to ask the right question to sort through it. Now, here's the fundamental reason why I care so deeply about this. Kids, young kids. What do 4-year-olds do wherever they are in the world? They ask 1,000 questions. But I've looked at data primarily in the US, and I think from what I can tell, it's pretty consistent around the world. Here's the data. The average student from 4 years old to 24 years old sitting in a class, an hour-long class in a day for 1 month, the average student asks 1 question per month about content in the class. Versus the average preschooler, 4-year-old, asks hundreds of questions a day. How many questions does the teacher ask in that same 1-hour period? Every hour, a teacher on average is asking 50 to 100 questions. 50 to 100. And if you don't answer the first question, I'll give you 1 second to answer, and if you don't answer it, I'll ask you a second question. If you don't answer that, I'll give you a half a second. We learn growing up that leaders like teachers ask lots of questions, but they're demanding quick, simple answers. And my proposal is, let's turn the tide. Let's value questions not just for our work as adults, but for that next generation. I was near the Great Wall of China recently and took this picture of this grandfather with his daughter. Can you see the love in his eyes for that little girl? Can you feel it? He cares about her becoming something in the future. This is one of my granddaughters. We have 6. And when she was looking up at me when I was taking that picture, I could see in her eyes her trust in me in helping her get ready for the future. And I know, her name is Stella, I know that for her future, the key, from my perspective, is keeping her questions alive so that when she becomes an adult and works for SAP or any other company in this room, she'll be a great contributor to ideas that change the world, just as you will. Thank you for the time. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you.
Hal, great job, man. Great job.